announcements while we wait for people to get logged in. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome everybody to PAYCO's general membership meeting. Today is Tuesday, December 19th, 2023. We are very pleased to have with us Merisa Bowers from OBLIQ. And before we get started, just a couple of announcements. We do have our workers' compensation roundtable scheduled for January the 18th. Dr. Bradley Lewis, the Chief Medical Officer of the Bureau of Workers' Compensation, and Dr. Tracy Archibald, the Ohio BWC Pharmacy Manager, are going to be talking with us about the Bureau's pharmacy program, how the BWC is addressing the opioid crisis, and the evolution of Ohio Administrative Code 4123-6-217 that sets forth the rules and procedures that a physician has to follow in order to prescribe opioids in a workers' compensation claim in the acute, subacute, and chronic phases of treatment. So that is Thursday, January the 18th at noon. Registration is open on the website. We also have our general membership meeting scheduled for January the 16th at noon. David Nyan is going to be presenting to us. He is with Trial Tech Support, and that is a nationwide full-service trial technology support company. They offer assistance with graphics and hot seat, pre-trial coordination, war room setup, on-site concierge, post-trial teardown, and hardware rental. So that will be an interesting topic for anybody in the litigation field, especially, but for anyone else as well. We will not have a legal insight session today during the month of December, just because of the holidays. Things are very crazy, and people's schedules are pretty full. The PAYCO news is coming out this afternoon with a lot more information. We do want to make sure that this is on your radar. Paralegal Day 2024 is scheduled for Monday, May the 20th, 2024. It will be at the Creekside Event Center once again. There are lots of details that will be coming out in the month of January and February. Get that on your calendar now. You are not going to want to miss this. We have a fabulous keynote speaker lined up. So we be watching the PAYCO news and the website for more information on that. Does anybody, any of the PAYCO leaders on the call, does anybody have any announcements or any information to share with us real quick? No? Okay, then let's get right to it. Today, as I mentioned, we have Merisa Bowers. She is with OBLIQ, and she is going to be discussing AI and the ethics of using AI. Merisa, if you would like to just go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then launch right in. If you prefer, do you prefer that we hold questions to the end?
No, I'm happy to have questions as we go. And if it's okay, I'm going to probably ask a few questions. And if you all want to unmute from time to time, please feel free to.
Okay.
This is much more fun when it's a little bit more interactive, and I can gauge your interest and your knowledge levels. So feel free to come on camera. I don't mind if you're eating. I'd love to see your faces.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And I will be monitoring the chat, and if questions come up in the chat, I'll be sure to pass those along to you as they come along, because I know it's difficult to follow your presentation and monitor the chat all at the same time.
Perfect. Okay, well, great. Well, thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Lori and Angela, for setting up today's meeting. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Merisa Bowers. I work at OBLIQ. I've been here for a little less than a year, Ohio Bar Liability Insurance Company. We provide legal malpractice insurance for Ohio-based attorneys, and some of your firms may be insured by us. As a practitioner, I was in private practice for about 13 years. I was insured by OBLIQ most of that time, and I absolutely love my role. So as loss prevention counsel, we offer a hotline for our insured attorneys or for paralegals that are supporting those insured attorneys to call us with questions. The questions range from everything about we have an attorney planning to retire, what should we do? To I have an angry client, what should I do? To we had a security breach, what should we do? We also offer complimentary ethics consults to our insured attorneys, and that is with outside ethics counsel. Our policyholders are entitled to a 1-hour ethics consult per policy period, so they can get confidential legal advice from outside ethics counsel, which they can really rely on and give them significant peace of mind if there is a very specific situation. Another little piece about what we do is we generate guidance and written content on ethical and professional conduct and malpractice avoidance topics. So from responding to Google reviews to a lot of writing about AI and the Corporate Transparency Act, things like that. We produce content on a weekly basis, and then additional content goes out through OSBA publications and other organization publications from time to time. So please, for those of you whose firms are insured by OBLIQ, please feel free to reach out to us. We have a lot of resources available for practitioners, especially our solo and small firms. So with that, let me go ahead and get started. I love this presentation. We're going to be talking about AI today. And let me go ahead and get my screen shared. Oop. Hang on just a second for me. Okay. So we're going to be talking about AI and the application of new AI tools, particularly in the realm of the legal industry. But I'm also going to just kind of give a background, since this is all very new and a lot of folks really don't know what it is that we're even talking about. It feels very foreign. So I'm going to give you just some basics around AI today. All right, so recent media coverage has highlighted remarkable achievements by AI. You've probably heard about this in the news, including the ability to write speeches, pass exams, including the multi-state bar exam, and outperform Jeopardy champions. These are making an impact on the legal industry. As you can see here from this slide, it shows what a difference was achieved in a relatively short time period in performance on the MBE, the multi-state bar exam. ChatGPT-4, which is the latest model of the OpenAI program, ChatGPT, is performing better than student average at this point. However, as in risk management, which is what we do here at OBLIQ, we're trying to give guidance to professionals on how to safely use AI in their practices. So what is AI? What is it that we're talking about here? IBM defines artificial intelligence as a field which combines computer science and robust data sets to enable problem solving. Using algorithms, AI systems source available data to output rational predictions. And a subfield of AI is known as learning or large language models, LLM. And that's a primary component of natural language processing. Natural language processing is the ability of these tech systems to recognize human speech, whether it's verbal or whether it's written, and to be able to create those outputs. So interpret that natural human language, natural language, that natural speech, analyze it for the data points within the speech that we're creating, and then output language or create an output that mimics that natural language output. Natural language processing focuses on enabling computers to comprehend and generate human language, and it is evolving beyond just human language and into other types of generative output. And I'll share some of that here in a little bit. So I mentioned that what's driving AI's capacity is the data sets that it relies on. And I know that we all love a good Latin term thrown in here or there, so I wanted to share with you one of the new Latin terms that I became familiar with, corpora. And what this means is a collection of linguistic data, usually contained in a computer database, that's used for research, scholarship, and teaching. So in this context, our large language models, the LLMs, are trained on corpora, including online book libraries, a lot of the data that comes out that gets scraped off of social media and other types of web pages. And it uses that information to predict a response to a prompt. So I know this feels maybe like it just sprang up this year, right? Why are we talking about AI, and why is there this sort of explosion right now? Well, I would remind all of us that AI has already become very prevalent in our own homes. Siri and Alexa are the two common large language models that are already in use in daily life. The Google Assistant that might alert on my phone here if I say it too loudly, they're listening to our language and our speech patterns, and they've already been enabled to identify things that we say based on a prompt. As an example of this, let me share this. This is from 2015, right? So this just shows a little bit about how long these LLMs and AI assistants have been around.
And with having to sustain a filibuster to avoid disapproval from Congress, is the president upset that he couldn't get even one Republican perhaps to sign?
Sorry, I'm not sure what you want me to change.
Okay, I get it.
That was on time.
All right, was everybody able to hear that? Yes, okay, good. So 8 years ago, we have Siri interrupting a presidential briefing and certainly listening in on the question that was being asked by the reporter.
And
all right, so why did we have this huge spike in AI news and buzz earlier this year? Well, it's about generative AI. And in the past, what we've seen are lower sophisticated versions that were maybe not as available to the public. We had a lot of analytic AI in play where our systems were able to take data that we input and then reformat that data into a new way or analyze that data in a new way. But generative AI has had leaps and bounds just in the last year. It was last November that OpenAI released GPT to the public. So it's only been about a year. Generative AI means that it's capable of generating text, images, code, or other content in response to a prompt, which is distinct, like I said, from analytic AI. There are other tools that are emerging that use generative AI besides just GPT. Google has Bard AI and Meta introduced Llama earlier this year. But the other tool that's being very popularized, particularly in the legal industry, is a tool called CoCounsel, which has been produced, I think, by Case Text, and it's actually being integrated into a lot of into Microsoft. And so CoCounsel is a legal generative AI tool that can help assist with brief writing and legal argument creation. which is a bit more sophisticated and supposedly has more controls than GPT. Another tool aspect of generative AI is generated art or visual output. I've got two examples here on the screen, and I'm going to talk a little bit later about the Zariah of the Dawn image that you see on the left side of your screen. Both of these two images, Zariah of the Dawn's cover page and the lesson, these are graphic novels that were written by these respective authors. And the authors, they wrote the story. But what they did to create the art was to use a program called Midjourney. And Midjourney has become very popular as a tool to create AI-generated art that goes along with storyboard based on inputs from the author or from the creator. So in the lesson, the team behind the comic, this graphic novel, they described what they wanted the visual output to be. So they used the phrase Hitchcock blonde to describe the main character. And you can see what Midjourney came up with in response to that prompt: create a Hitchcock blonde posing with her arms crossed and looking, and it would give adjectives to describe how they wanted her body language or her nonverbal communication to sort of represent. So as an output, they would get a very Grace Kelly looking result time and time again. So either you're welcome to show of hands, put it in the chat, or come off of mute. But how many people here have used GPT, have used chat?
Yeah, I have. Yep.
Great. And Lori, what do you know what version were you able to trial GPT-4, or do you have a paid subscription to GPT-4?
No, I have GPT 3.5. My husband uses GPT-4.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
What are you using it for?
Myself, I'm using it for my full-time job with a tech company. I'm asking it generating policy letters for something that would fall under controlled unclassified information, that new requirement with the government. I just used it this morning to say, hey, write me an internship timeline, how to assess interns. It's just something generic where I can't get it out of my mouth, my head, but it's pulling from everywhere, and it's better than Google.
Perfect. Yeah. So helping to create templates or policy guidelines, I've heard that as a great use of the tool. Were you able to play around on your husband's GPT-4 version?
I haven't, but he has, and he loves it. We're rebranding our business, and he's used it to write, say, form letters to advertisers or on LinkedIn. He's used it to check on, to generate a checklist on what he needs to do to rebrand. Sorry, I'll put my camera on.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's loved it as well.
As a process creation tool. I was at a CLE last week, and the presenter was talking a lot about using it in that way, and I think it's brilliant. Anybody else? Nobody else came on chat about if you're using it. Is Lori the only one?
It's a good way to check yourself when you put everything together in your checklist to make sure it's more complete. Of course, you got to review it. It's a tool like anything else, and you're not going to rely on it.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, cool. Well, feel free to weigh in as I keep going. Oh, someone commented they've used it to help write a resume. Perfect. Yeah, that can be very helpful. Especially, I would think, coming up with those skills or things that you did on the job. that can be sort of hard to think of, but I'm assuming that like if you give it a title, it would be able to give you suggestions of types of skills or duties that you held in that job. Okay, and some model drafting for basic types of letters. That's great. Thanks for weighing in there in the chat. So what is Chat GPT? For those who may not be familiar with it, it's an AI-powered language model developed by this company called OpenAI, which you may have heard about in the news lately. There's a very symbiotic relationship that is now emerging that's coming out between Microsoft and OpenAI. So OpenAI is perhaps not as non-profit-y as we thought it was. It's actually very much in partnership with Microsoft. It's capable of generating human-like text based on context and past conversations. Again, it uses vast data sets, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the data that OpenAI was trained on later in our presentation, along with ongoing user input. So it's continuously learning based on the way that we are interacting with it collectively, and individually too. I'm told that as you use the tool more when you're logged in into your account, it starts to learn more about your writing styles and preferences as well. So with all of that said, a couple of things, particularly as it relates to use in a law practice, there is nothing confidential in OpenAI, right? There's no confidentiality, there's no privacy in this tool. And Lori, you heard Lori mention that. She said that we're not putting in any sensitive data. You're not using any kind of confidential or sensitive business information when you're using this tool, because everything that you're inputting is now becoming part of the OpenAI universe, the OpenAI corpora. Initially, this disclaimer was not built into the portal you see on your screen. Every time I go back to use GPT, there's a new disclaimer or a revised disclaimer. Okay, cool. And Lori mentions in the chat that she's used it, it's been giving her choices in format. So if you don't tell it what format you want it to output the request in, it may come back and ask you, do you want this as a bulleted list or do you want it as a narrative paragraph? One of the things that I've learned, and I appreciate there's some really practical tips here in the chat, and that may be useful to you all too, is once I sort of recognized that I need to interact with the tool almost as I would a colleague, right? So I want you to give me this information in this way. I want it to be X number of words long. I want it to be this format. And then once it gives you a response, you type back to the tool and say, no, I want it this way, or try again with more of this or a little bit less of that. The most interesting tip I took away from a CLE I was at last week was asking preliminary questions to the tool to find out what the tool needed you to tell it in order to give a comprehensive response. So Lori mentioned, I think, a rebranding checklist or process. So for example, before you just input, tell me the process to rebrand my company, the presenter suggested that you say, what information would you need from me in order to be able to create a rebranding process for a small business? And then the tool gave out the response that it needed, the information it needed. Yeah, isn't that cool? I thought that was a really sophisticated way. So yeah. Isn't that neat? Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a learning curve with using this tool, but I think it's super fascinating. I think that it can be really helpful in giving us some more sophisticated ways of working with this tool going forward.
And Marissa, just because it's so big, it's not like Google and you got to go down the list of who's offering what and pick and choose. This one actually puts it together for you, which is just so interesting to me.
Yeah. And like you said, it can be redundant. And sometimes it'll rephrase something that we know means the same thing as what it just said. So it is not perfect. It needs scrutiny, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Okay, so just for those of you who haven't actually seen it, I just wanted to show you the portal. And this is just kind of how fast it works, right? So I asked it, what are some of the best ways to use ChatGPT? And in honesty, I did this several months ago at this point. But I just wanted you to see a little bit about the interface and how the tool works. And it is constantly changing. And it knows it keeps a list of the prompts and the ways that I've used it in the past. So I asked here 2 questions. I asked, how can ChatGPT be used? And it gives you some suggestions: information retrieval, content generation, explaining a difficult concept in simplified language. It can translate between foreign languages. And it can scan information. So if you were to cut and paste something into the ChatGPT window and ask it to identify certain things from that text, it can do that. And that type of tool is being used across social media platforms as well. Amazon and a lot of major tech companies are using AI tools to identify tone, language, punctuation, that kind of thing. That's a lot about how these kind of community standards are getting flagged. There's a lot of AI being used in that process. So we're seeing our ability to be able to use those things that used to be reserved, I think, for these large corporations, now can be used in smaller businesses. Oh, nice. It can actually do a citation for you without having to pull out the blue book, is what Lori mentioned.
Just click on it.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Cool.
Version 2.
Okay. A couple reminders about ethical use, and we're going to talk here about Mata versus Avianca, but it's only as good as the input that it receives, right? And it is designed right now to give you kind of the most, it wants to people please, right? And I don't know how else to explain it, but apparently, like, whoever has created this tool has and this has been described to me by like people who are much more tech forward than I am. They have described it as having the temperature turned way up to be a people pleaser, to give us the information that we want it to give us. And so that's part of the problem here with the Mata versus Avianca case. Information is certainly not always correct that's going to be coming out of GPT, as these attorneys in New York found out earlier this year. LLMs such as GPT, Bard, or Llama are currently incapable of conducting accurate or reliable legal research. Some of the tools that are being offered now through Lexis AI or Westlaw, including Case Text and Co-Counsel, they are more sophisticated and they're more specific to legal research, but don't use chat for legal research, and be very careful if you're using it for legal brief writing. The attorneys here in Mata versus Avianca, they had a brief that was due back in March. They submitted a brief on jurisdictional issues in a federal court. This is a personal injury case. Their client was injured on an airplane, and they had to brief a jurisdictional issue. They apparently they submitted the brief and that magically found all of this case law that was directly on point to the proposition that they wanted to make. And shortly after they submitted the brief, defense counsel filed with the court and said, we are unable to locate any of the cases that they cited. We cannot find the arguments in any other legal research database. And so we would like them to explain or provide us with the cases and where they got them from. And the court agreed. The court ordered the attorneys for the plaintiff to file an affidavit explaining where they got their research. Unfortunately, these guys didn't own up to their mistake. And really where the sanctions came in is because they doubled down and really were dishonest in responding to the request. They attached copies of fabricated excerpts that were also created by ChatGPT with their affidavit. And ultimately, they did testify at a future hearing on a motion for sanctions, that they didn't understand the tool. They thought that it was just able to pull case law from other sources that they didn't have access to. And the judge ordered that they pay a penalty of $5,000. But more importantly, they have been completely humiliated, I think, in the legal industry, not necessarily for making the mistake, but for hiding their error instead of owning up to it. They had to write letters to every judge that they miscited, apologizing and owning their error. Shortly after this case was received public press, there was a federal judge in Texas and a couple other judges across the country that issued orders requiring attorneys to file certificates with their pleadings that no part of the filing was created by generative AI, or if it was, that a human being had reviewed and checked any AI generated text. This doesn't seem like it's broadly caught on. I think this is the point that I'm hearing more and more, is that this kind of conduct or misuse is already a violation of rules of professional conduct, or Rule 11, Rules of Civil Procedure. And so an attorney who is misusing GPT is really no different than an attorney who is misusing Westlaw, for example. But so I don't see these orders really taking off. But I do think that it's important that we make sure that attorneys and staff are aware of their limitations and our requirements to check cases and do our own review of any information that's generated by these tools. Okay, any questions on that? All right. I already mentioned that we need to be cautious about Rule 1.6 confidentiality, and that using open source or public kind of public exposure or public facing AI tools is not confidential. I also, as a corollary, want to mention that I see privacy as a different concept than confidentiality. Privacy may have to do with not necessarily confidential or sensitive information, but generally things that I don't want every single internet or tech company to know about me, right? So privacy settings, being mindful about even sharing sort of things that might be publicly available, not confidential, but still are of a private nature. Just very briefly, I mentioned that the other side of AI is analytic versus generative. There is also a growing trend in the legal industry to create customized data analytic tools so that firms or law adjacent industries are better able to access and analyze data with the assistance of AI tools. There was a demonstration last week as well with some new tools related to Excel. Lori, I don't know if you've seen any of this demonstrated yet, but I'm sure you would find it just as cool. They are integrating natural language processing into Excel. So you can use natural language prompts to explain what you want Excel to do versus being forced into learning how to create that equation. So I'm really excited about some of these new Microsoft tools that are coming out. I think it's going to really help small business owners, generally speaking. One custom application of AI that we've seen piloted so far is a tool called Rentervention. It's a chat bot that is being used by the Legal Aid Society in the Chicago area. And what this does is that it helps tenants fill out forms to prevent evictions or to escrow rent if there is a problem. And so tenants are able to interface with this tool. It can help with pro se litigants, but it also can help streamline the work of the legal aid attorneys. So I just thought this is a really neat example of how custom AI tools are being accessed and implemented in the legal sector.
And that is a program that is specific to Chicago.
Right now, yeah, Rentervention is a tool that was specifically created for this Legal Aid Society of Cook County.
Oh, wow. I wonder if they have plans to move that to other areas of the country, because that would be very helpful to a lot of people.
Now
I'm sure
that this
would fill quite a need.
Absolutely. And now that the software is written for this, I'm sure it could be implemented across, in other communities.
That'd be great.
Okay. A couple of do's and don'ts that I wanted to share, especially since this is about professional conduct and ethics. And just a reminder about some applications of some of the rules of professional conduct. Attorneys do have a duty to supervise under rules 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3 of the rules of professional conduct. Normally, this has been applied in the context of supervising subordinate associate attorneys and supervising staff. There is I'm hearing growing trends though, that there's an application of this duty to how we're using these AI assistants as well. I mentioned here about some do's and don'ts. I also wanted to mention too that Rule 1.1 Comment 8 does create an expectation and a standard that attorneys should maintain knowledge and competence when it comes to developing technology. And I know that that can sometimes be difficult for some of our more seasoned attorneys, but Rule 1.1 Comment 8 does really encourage and establish that standard that attorneys need to maintain competence across technology trends as well. Okay. I have about 5 more minutes? Is that about fair?
We've got about 10 more minutes.
Okay,
10, 12 minutes.
Cool. Okay, great. Let me share with you a couple cases that you might find interesting. This is some legal trends around use of AI. These may not relate directly to your practice, but I just think it's kind of cool to sort of get a vibe on where we are with this. This case of the Thaler versus Perlmutter. So this guy Thaler, he's kind of an an activist, and actually you'll notice this with Chris Castanova too. They are intentionally pushing the envelope when it comes to AI and copyright. In this particular scenario, though, Thaler wrote a computer program that used AI, and he then had his computer program, his AI tool, create a piece of work. And I believe it was a visual art. He then filed he got it copyrighted. I think they didn't catch it. So he got a copyright for this piece of work that was created by his computer tool. They didn't catch it, but when they did catch it is when he tried to transfer the copyright from his computer system to himself. And they said, we never should have issued the copyright to begin with. And so therefore we're denying the transfer and we're striking the copyright from the registry completely. The primary takeaway from this case, this is a judge from the U.S. District from the District of Columbia. She just came back to and emphasized that human authorship is the bedrock requirement of copyright. And she really didn't have to go a whole lot further in this case because Thaler stipulated to the fact that the computer program created the original art to begin with. This is pending appeal to the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. So I don't think they're going to overturn this decision, but stay tuned. I think the hope, and I'll get to this as we move forward. I think the hope is that they're trying to establish criteria to determine how much AI can you use and still qualify for copyright. So that's really the push in the strategy that's going on here with these copyright applicants. All right, I mentioned earlier about Zaraya of the Dawn. This is a really interesting graphic novel. If anybody likes graphic novels in your free time, this is a fun one. Of course, it is dystopic, futuristic story, and Zaraya is the hero of the novel. So Chris Castanova, like I mentioned, she wrote the storyline, she wrote the quotes, the speaking of the characters, and she used Midjourney to create the art. Initially, she was granted a copyright for everything. But then what she did is she started sharing that news, right? She said, I got a copyright for the first AI created art. And the Copyright Office found her bragging about this. And then they rescinded the copyright for the visual art. Originally, they rescinded the entire copyright for the whole novel. But Castanova and her attorney exchanged multiple letters with the Copyright Office. And ultimately, the Copyright Office allowed her to maintain copyright for the storyline and the text, but rescinded the copyright for the visual art. Castanova did try to argue that she had had enough control and editing over the work that was created by Midjourney. The Copyright Office said that it was inadequate, it was not enough, and it was not enough human authorship to sustain a claim to copyright. This is a super recent decision from last week. And I just came across this article today, so you guys are the first ones to hear about this in this presentation. This is about a visual art that was not created by Midjourney, so a little bit different from most of the other test cases that we've seen. This is a program, an AI tool called Raghav, and the artist here, Ankit Sani, he took a picture, which is this base image on the left side of your screen, the one that's like kind of an orangey sunset with the clouds over a building. He input his photograph into the Raghav tool and then said, I want you to make it look as if it was in the character of Starry Night by Van Gogh. Raghav then output the picture on the right-hand side. So you can kind of see here the building in sort of a 3D, more of the geometric kind of style here. And then you've got the sun sort of positioned over the roof line similarly, and then just sort of some swirls and blue and yellow. The copyright registration for this piece of art was denied. What was super interesting about the denial letter, though, is that the review board, in denying the copyright, did start to enumerate specific factors that artists could perhaps use going forward in order to know where that boundary is, where that line is between enough human effort, human ownership, human authorship in order to qualify for a copyright. Any questions about any of this so far? Okay. I'm going to skim over this a little bit. I mentioned earlier about the data sets that are going into these OpenAI tools. And a lot of these cases that I have here on the screen, summary judgment's been granted on almost every claim made in the complaint so far. There are some surviving counts, but certainly not to the level of alleged copyright infringement that was what was alleged in the original complaints. So the Tremblay and the Silverman cases are artists who do have copyrighted works who allege copyright infringement by OpenAI. And their allegation is roughly along the lines of, because you trained your tool on my copyrighted materials, anything that is output is thus a copyright infringement. And the court has struck down that argument. They have said, no, you have to be able to show me the work that it's generated and then prove that work that it generated is an infringement on your copyright. So most of those counts have been thrown out on summary judgment. The other two cases at the bottom, plaintiff's PM and plaintiff's AT, have more to do with the privacy aspect. They are filed in California because California has some very specific privacy laws. And those cases are more along the lines of, I'm a private citizen with information on social media, on the internet, but you illegally scraped that information from the internet and used it to train your tool. You've thus violated my privacy. Again, most of those most of those claims have been thrown out. We're still waiting to see kind of what survives and what the takeaways are from those cases. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to mention, the other major aspect, and this ties very clearly into, I think, what we're seeing going on with the Copyright Office. The strike, the Hollywood writers' strike, was largely driven by the use of AI and supplanting writers with AI-generated content. Keep in mind, AI-generated content at this point is really, it's not original, right? It is based on what has already been done, what has already been written. And so it can reorganize information into new ways, but it really cannot create new concepts or create new stories at this point. Certainly, it's not able to or create new language. So there are lots of drawbacks and limitations on generative AI at this point in time, but certainly a concern in the writer's strike. I think that one of the things that we're seeing with these copyright applications is testing that boundary. Like I mentioned, what needs to happen. Yeah, Teresa asked if that's plagiarism, right? So it could be, right? But you'd have to prove that plagiarism violated a copyright or trademark. if it were to be a visual production. You know, and that is a different ethical question, right? So plagiarism, I think, really more has to do with ethics. And it could be a plagiarized in maybe in an academic setting. So the academic world is really having to sort of grapple with this as well, especially as students are using AI in order to generate responses to maybe essay questions or to prompts. How do you assess and determine an appropriate use of a tool where a student adequately applied their own judgment and their own knowledge versus what just came out of chat, for example. As you use chat, you will probably start to be able to identify language that looks just like chat wrote it, right? Like it is pretty generic and it all sort of has the same vanilla taste once it comes out. And there are ways to use the tool to get rid of that sort of very generic flavor, but it takes a lot of effort, I think, to fine tune that at this point. Lori asked the question, how much do I think AI will replace jobs in the legal profession in the future? So I'm working on an article for the OSBA about ethical use and about kind of leaning into using AI. Generally, the presentations I have been at have largely supported the use and learning how to use this tool. I think that it may not eliminate jobs, but I do think that it will make us more efficient. I think it will give us greater ability to do the same amount of work in less amount of time. And I think that those of us who can learn this tool are going to be better positioned for future careers and career advancement. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Yeah, I agree. Lori mentioned that she thinks efficiency is one of the best aspects of this tool. I wholeheartedly agree. Just like we became super more efficient when we got rid of bound books and moved ourselves into using Lexis and Westlaw for legal research. I think that maybe we lost, I don't know, some ability to like open a book and research it, but we've gained so much in efficiency. And so that is the ongoing trade-off with technology. Lots of people don't know how to read an actual map anymore, but they have a tool that in 2 seconds tells them how to get to where they're going. So it's a constant trade-off, I think, and we have to be aware and alert to that. But maintaining critical thinking, human discretion, and human creativity. All right. Well, thank you all so much for having me today. This was super fun. I think you all can tell that I really enjoy this presentation and this topic. I would recommend that your firms start to think about AI use policies in your firms. I understand lawyers are notorious about not having enough policies or processes that are written for their firm, but I do think that it is important that we start to give clear guidance on, especially to associates, associate attorneys, and our staff, so that they know where those boundaries are. And I would say that you'll be able to set yourselves apart in your firm by being able to suggest policies regarding AI use going forward.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Merisa. We appreciate your being here and sharing your expertise and your time with us. We also want to thank Anderson Court Reporting for providing today's link and recording today's session. We appreciate you very much. And we also appreciate all of our members who were in attendance today. Happy holidays to everybody. As I said before, there is no Legal Insights session in the month of December. So we will pick things back up in January, and we hope to see you then. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. I'll send the certificate out shortly. And thanks so much, Merisa. Really great brief. This is a very interesting subject.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Thank you too. Happy holidays.
You too.